Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
I'm your co-host, Joanne Leon.
On today's episode, December 30th, 2016, we interview Elijah Magnier about his work in Syria and Iraq. But before we do that, let's go around the empire. We begin with the United States Pacific Command and increasing tensions between the U.S. government and the Filipino government led by President Duarte. Duarte has claimed the CIA has tried to overthrow his government, and he also says he now plans to bar the United States from the battle against a long-running insurrection in the Muslim-dominated South that's killed an estimated 120,000 people. Quote, "These special forces have to go," said the tough-talking Filipino president. Duarte says he wants to oust American Special Operations Forces and advisors who have operated for 15 years in Mindanao, the island group at the center of insurgent activity by several jihadist factions, some of them pledging allegiance to the so-called Islamic State that is centered in Iraq and Syria. The U.S. military presence in this secretive battlefield, a total of about 1,500 personnel over the years, has diminished since Duarte took office in June, and he says he will review permitting the Americans to stay. Now on to United States Africa Command. Reuters reports that Congo's opposition leader signed a deal with the party of President Joseph Kabila on Saturday that will require him to step down after elections that must take place before the end of 2017. Mediators from the Congo's Catholic Church have been heaping pressure on both sides for weeks to sign an agreement aimed at averting a slide into anarchy and another possible civil war. Huge hurdles remain, however. The Electoral Commission has said elections may not be possible until 2018, and many doubt Kabila really intends to stand down. The question remains, if a civil war does break out, will the U.S. Special Forces in the region, already operating in the region, get involved? The United States Southern Command. From the Associated Press, U.S. prosecutors have opened an investigation against senior Venezuelan officials for laundering riches from food contracts through the U.S. financial system. People with direct knowledge of the probes. Quote, "Lately food is a better business than drugs," unquote, said retired General Claver Alcala, who helped oversee border security. Over the past 2 decades, the United States and Venezuela have had difficult relationships since the 1998 election of Hugo Chavez. As president, Venezuela has criticized U.S. foreign policy, including the war on terror, promoted socialist and left-wing governments throughout Latin America. Chavez accused the United States of sponsoring a coup d'etat that temporarily removed him from power in 2002, and the United States regularly accuses Venezuela of undermining democracy. Relations are unlikely to improve under President Trump, especially if Rex Tillerson becomes Secretary of State, who, when he was CEO of ExxonMobil, battled with Chavez and the Maduro governments throughout the world. Now to United States European Command. President Obama increased sanctions on the Russian Federation and expelled 35 diplomats in retaliation for allegations that Russia hacked DNC servers and released information to WikiLeaks, something WikiLeaks has explicitly denied. Russia responded by saying, quote, "Russia will not resort to irresponsible kitchen diplomacy, but will plan our further steps to restore Russian-U.S. relations based on the policies of the Trump administration." Russian President Vladimir Putin even invited the children of U.S. diplomats to his New Year's party, appearing to be trolling. And finally, the United States Central Command. A ceasefire negotiated between Russia, Turkey, and the Syrian government, as well as Iran and some Syrian rebel groups, is supported by Turkey explicitly and excludes factions deemed by the United Nations Security Council as terrorists. This rules out the Islamic State in Iraq and Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, the former Al Qaeda affiliate in Syria. They used to be known as Jabhat al-Nusra. The timing of the deal is critical. The Russian-Turkish Entente has exploited the political transition in Washington, ignoring the Obama administration in its dying days and betting that a Trump administration will accept the process already underway. Stay with us for our interview concerning this exact story. Thanks.
Okay, that was Around the Empire. And now Dan and I are on the line and very excited to interview veteran war correspondent Elijah Magnier, speaking to us from Brussels. Today, we're going to talk about the latest developments in the war in Syria and Iraq, the new ceasefire, the upcoming peace talks, and the shift in power dynamics toward Russia, Iran, Turkey, as they use their new alliance to try to broker a solution for the unrest in the region. Elijah is a chief international war correspondent for Al Media. He covers the EU, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and the region, and he's an expert on terrorism. Hello, Elijah. I'm so excited to talk with you and grateful that you're giving us some of your time for this interview.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started on the latest developments in the war in Syria and Iraq, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, the wars that you've covered during your career, and any other details about your work that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Okay, so I'm a war correspondent since 1982. For the last 30-odd years, I've covered most conflict in the Middle East, the Balkans, and North Africa. So starting from the Israeli invasion to Lebanon in 1982, the civil war in Lebanon, the Iraq-Iran war. I covered also the Balkan wars for 4 years, the first and second Gulf War, the second Sudanese civil war, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the second Israeli-Hezbollah war in Lebanon in 2006, the fall of Gaddafi in Libya and Tripoli in 2011, and the actual ongoing war in Iraq and Syria.
That's a lot of war. How about if we start with what's happening right now, the ceasefire that was just announced yesterday. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about which rebel groups are involved and, what's Al Qaeda going to do, what you can tell us about the perspective of all the different actors that are involved in the ceasefire and the other ones that are sort of watching this happen outside of their control.
Right. There is a ceasefire announced by Turkey, Russia, Iran, and Damascus. They all agree on a ceasefire starting from the 30th of December, midnight, the 30th of December, which is 2100 GMT, local time in Syria. And that involves all parties and all belligerent, at the exception of ISIS, ISIL, or Daesh, Jabhat al-Nusra or Al Qaeda in Syria, and all the other jihadi groups like Jund al-Aqsa, like Jaysh al-Muhajirin wal-Ansar, and all those who just have the same ideology and the same goal and objective of Al-Qaeda. The ceasefire is resisting so far, is going well, apart from few small areas around Damascus in Barada Valley, where there is a crisis of water supply to Damascus as a capital. There's also another small clash that took place also this morning in Hama, in a rural area, but that is insignificant in comparison to the 5.5 years of war that the country suffered from. The main historical thing about this ceasefire is, first of all, is excluding the United States and Europe. It is joining the effort between Russia and a NATO country like Turkey. It is not including main player for the first meeting in Kazakhstan that is due to happen in a month time from today, starting from today, which are Qatar and Saudi Arabia. But Russia made sure to include Egypt, that is pro-Syrian government, and will include other parties later on, but the United Nations are supposed to be present. The ceasefire will offer an opportunity to start the peace process. Of course, all the jihadists like Al Qaeda, like ISIS, and the other group that work with Al Qaeda are not going to accept a ceasefire because they are completely excluded. Their goal is not to see a democracy in Syria. Their goal is not to live with other religion or other groups. They want to establish their Islamic Emirate once they have the possibility to do so. And they reject any deal, not only with the government of Syria, but with any other government, because they want to have an Islamic State, similar to what ISIS has proclaimed. Therefore, we don't expect the ceasefire to hold on all fronts. It's going to be a violation of ceasefire by the groups who are excluded. And the very difficult part is Al Qaeda in Syria, because Al Qaeda is mixed with many other groups and is one of the most intelligent and efficient force on the ground. That's going to be difficult to dislodge.
Right, and they won't be at the table. They don't want a ceasefire, and they control a lot of territory still. True or not true?
They don't control any territory on their own. They control territory with other rebels and other jihadists. This is what Russia has been asking the United States since the first ceasefire last year, or this year, when they've started to talk with the Americans. And they asked to split the rebels and the moderate rebels from Al Qaeda and the jihadists. If Turkey is able to do so, because Turkey forced many groups to sign the documents, which is a genuine document that is out today and is available, the United States would have been able to do so willingly, but the United States choose not to do so. Therefore, it is extremely difficult to know what to target unless they split. I mean, Al Qaeda split from the other rebels. And by splitting, it's going to create a kind of infighting among rebels and jihadists, because the jihadists are not going to accept to be the only target. Therefore, they're not going to accept to be isolated, and they will use their internal base they have created amongst the society to show that they have offered a lot of sacrifices for the cause that they came to fight for, and they just can't detach themselves from the others. Therefore, Al Qaeda is going to collect as many allies as possible, not to sabotage the ceasefire, but to make sure it is not separated from the other group, therefore is not targeted on its own.
Right, which is kind of the way things have been for so many months now. Well, first of all, how about the Kurds? Where do the Kurds fit in?
Right, that's a very good question. The Russian consider the Kurds as partners in this war because they control a part of the territory. The only problem with the Kurds is it is not possible to unite the Kurds and the Turks around the same table. The Turks consider the Kurds as a terrorist group, and they don't want to deal with them. On the contrary, they want to fight them and they want to try to eliminate them, which is completely illogical and is not going to happen because the Kurds control a good part in the north of the country, and they are good fighters. They are Syrians. They are entitled to be part of the peace process. But I think Russia is going to isolate the matter. So Russia is not going to deal with the issue as a whole. It's going to divide it. Therefore, it's going to accept Turkey dealing with all the rebels and all the factions to be able to reach a ceasefire, to be able to put the peace process on a track, no matter how many batches it's going to receive, but at the same time, postpone the issue of the Kurds for another stage. Because Turkey is showing weakness in dealing with the northern city of Al-Bab and is losing many soldiers and officers, there are many of its proxies also fighting in the northern city against ISIS. Therefore, Turkey is not looking very good to be able to dictate all its conditions that it needs to negotiate with two essential partners in Syria if Turkey doesn't want to go through the Syrian government, which are Russia and Iran. And in the plans of Russia and Iran, the Kurds have a place in Syria because they are Syrian and they cannot be excluded.
I see. So they're going to divide this into there really are a number of different wars going on inside Syria. Separate wars, so they're going to do separate talks for separate wars. And then maybe wait for Turkey to hope that they come to their senses, or?
I don't think so. I mean, just waiting for, they are working by priorities now. And the priority first is to use the influence of Turkey to stop tens of thousands of militants under the Turkish influence, to stop the war and to put the peace process on the right track. And then they would deal with the Kurds issue.
What do you think of the news that's coming out in European and Western media about how there's going to be a partition in Syria and zones of influence and a federated government? I thought the quotes were a little bit shaky, a little anonymous, and I've seen some talk online about how that's just not going to happen. That's just an attempt to sabotage the peace talk. You have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think the partition of Syria was something very much on the agenda of everybody until very recently. The partition of Syria was an ipso facto, or something that is going to happen because the Russian and the Syrian army and their allies are not able to go north to take back Raqqa, to take back Idlib, and to take back all the other area, depending on the Russian goal and intention, really. With the presence of Turkey, things change, particularly after the fall of Aleppo. Aleppo is the second biggest city in the country, and the fall of Aleppo means that all the main cities that are of interest to the regime or to the Syrian government are back under the control of Damascus, at the exception of Idlib and Raqqa as a main city. We have in the south also Suwaida, but these are not a problem because at the moment, dealing with Raqqa is not an issue because there is ISIS. And dealing with ISIS is nobody's priority because defeating ISIS at the moment doesn't give any gain on the international arena and on negotiation table. It won't be useful for Turkey. It won't be useful for Russia or Iran or the Syrian government at the moment. If more ISIS land is lost, then there is no gain or nothing to negotiate with. But if Russia and Iran and Damascus manage to recover a land under control of Al Qaeda and other rebels, then that is a good bargain, a card they can use on Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the jihadists and the rebels when the negotiation reach an advanced step. Therefore, for the moment, the partition of Syria is no longer on the table because Turkey is in, and Turkey is saying that it's going to deal with the north of Syria, and is going to control the part that ISIS is occupying in coordination with the Russians. And because Turkey is in need of air power, so sooner or later Russia will ask from will ask from Russia to intervene and to support the Turkish and the proxy forces that are fighting with Turkey against ISIS.
In Al-Bab now, are you talking about, or in Raqqa?
No, I'm talking about Al-Bab.
Okay.
First of all, to start with, and then going down from Al-Bab until reaching the city of Raqqa.
Yeah, I actually because you're talking about the priority of ISIS, and as you know, our country is going through a transition of power right now as President Obama is exiting and Donald Trump is getting ready to assume the presidency. And from what it looks like and what I've read, it looks like the U.S. has kind of been pushed out of relevance from what it looks like. It looks like they're not even really at the table, or they're having a minor role. And you said that people at the table aren't prioritizing ISIS, but according to President-elect Trump and previously President Obama, ISIS was their priority in Syria. So can you talk about how the U.S. was slowly marginalized, it looks like, and what role you think a President Trump might have in this process as he enters it, I guess, on January 20th?
President Obama has been saying that he is fighting ISIS for the last 2 years, carrying out around 17,000 airstrikes against ISIS. As a result, we did not see ISIS power in Syria diminishing significantly, apart from the Kurdish city of Kobani in the north of Syria, around Al-Hasaka and the rural Raqqa. Therefore, fighting ISIS really was not a priority to anyone. If we take one player at a time, if we take Syria, for example, and Russia, ISIS is really not the problem to be defeated in Syria, because ISIS no longer receive support from the international stage, no UN support, no longer Turkish support, is no longer supported by the countries in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Turkey is closing down all the logistic support on ISIS. Therefore, ISIS is like an orphan force on its own in Syria and in Iraq, surrounded by enemies and nothing else, while Al Qaeda is benefiting from the UN, the American, the Middle Eastern, and everybody's support indirectly and directly in some cases, because it is mixing with the rebels. And by mixing itself with the rebels, everybody is talking about the opposition or moderate rebels, including the jihadists. Therefore, we can see American weapons used by Al Qaeda and other jihadist groups in Syria, and nobody is mentioning these in the mainstream media, or saying that these are the jihadists of Al Qaeda, and they are the most dangerous group in Syria because they are the most experienced. They managed to gain a popularity. They managed to mix with the population of Syria. There are many Syrians who are part of Al Qaeda, while ISIS gathered only enemies. Therefore, Al Qaeda is the priority, is not ISIS. Prioritizing ISIS and Al Qaeda together, yes, that would be a very good plan. But Obama didn't do that. Obama went on selective target of Al Qaeda, killing few old core Al Qaeda personalities that are in Syria, and he killed them by drone attack in Syria. And if they are killed in Syria, it means they are in Syria operating. And they're not operating on their own. They're operating within a group that has over 10,000 fighters. They are excellent fighters. They have a very strong ideology. When they fight in any area, it's not easy to defeat them, and they don't go back on their objective unless no more militants are present to continue the fight. Therefore, these are the priorities. What President Trump is going to do, we don't know. We know what Obama is doing, and President Trump foreign policy is so far very obscure and unknown. We don't have experience with President Trump. Therefore, we don't know what he's going to do with Al Qaeda, and we don't know what he's going to do with ISIS. And Al Qaeda, until today, still receive the support of the countries of the region, but ISIS is no longer receive any support. Therefore, it is important to cut the finance, the arms supply, and all the support on all terrorist groups, including ISIS and Al Qaeda and those who fight with them, and then start dealing with these groups on their own.
Do you think the U.S. is part? Because right now, that's a good answer to the first part of the question. The peace process that you detailed extensively there. It looks like the U.S. is irrelevant. Is that a bad reading? Is the U.S. part of this process and they're just playing a sort of low-key role, or are they irrelevant to the Syrian peace process right now?
I think the Obama administration is irrelevant because there are differences that Secretary Kerry talked about between him and the Defense Secretary about what are the priority. And to be honest, Kerry was right when he wanted to down all the air force of Syria and Russia in exchange of separating Al Qaeda from all the other moderate groups. Unfortunately, the defense minister refused, and Kerry would have reached a unique deal in Syria and would have forced everybody to go around the table. The Obama administration made a mistake. Therefore, the Obama administration is excluded from any peace process until the new administration walks in and reveals its intention towards Syria. I think it's a big mistake to exclude the Americans from any peace process because they have a weight, they have excellent relationship with countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and they can impose a peaceful solution if that is the objective.
When you say the defense minister rejected, do you mean the U.S. Secretary of Defense or?
Yes. Yeah,
so you're talking about the September deal that
yes,
fell apart.
that's correct. Yeah.
So they had it right there. If everyone had done what they promised, that would have been a good solution.
That's correct.
How about Iran? How does Iran feel about all this? What do they want? What will they try to get at the table? How powerful are they in terms of the other? Who are the real power brokers, and what are they looking for?
Well, the main powerful party in Syria today is Russia, is not Iran. Although Iran was the reason behind the Russian intervention, although it is Iran who put pressure on Russia to bring it in Syria in April 2015, Iran is on a defense, and Iran is paying money, is paying logistic, is offering medical support, is offering proxies, is offering troops, is offering a lot of money to the Syrian government to keep the Syrian government and to regain, for the Syrian government to regain the position it was on before 2011. Iran had influence in Syria and excellent connection with the Syrian government in 2011. And for the last 5.5 years, Iran is defending this position. But Iran has a say on the Syrian arena because it is providing the ground force. Therefore, Russia is providing the air force, and Iran, with all the proxies on the ground, is providing the ground force to support the Syrian army. Therefore, they both have a role, but Russia is a superpower and has a major role.
The Gulf states, where do they stand?
The Gulf states today, they are not in a very good position because Russia moved in and changed the whole plan. In 2011, everybody was saying Assad is going to leave in 3 months, then 6 months, then 1 year, until the end of 2015. The Saudi foreign minister was saying Assad has to go either by military means or by peaceful means. He was very sure of himself that Assad is going to be removed from power by either way. Unfortunately for Saudi Arabia and Qatar, things didn't happen in the way they wanted to, because removing Assad to give the power to nobody, that's creating a vacuum, changing a regime that has an infrastructure for no regime, like it's happening in Libya today, and we saw the result and the consequences. Therefore, Saudi Arabia and Qatar had no plan who's going to replace Assad or who's going to take control of the Syrian government and take control of the country and expel the jihadis, ISIS and Al Qaeda. In fact, ISIS, that was supported by the regional countries when it was in Iraq, turned against everybody and started to threaten Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, all the Gulf countries, including Europe and the United States, as soon as they established themselves in Mosul and Raqqa. Therefore, you feed a monster, this monster turns against you. ISIS was no longer possible to contain and no longer possible to control, and everybody was using ISIS by more or less manipulating what ISIS is doing for their own agenda. But unfortunately, Saudi Arabia and Qatar have no agenda in Syria but to remove the regime and to remove the government and create what? A vacuum. Therefore, today, they have no place in finding a solution because they have never offered a solution. But because they have forces on the ground, like Jaish al-Islam, they have other forces. Qatar enjoy a good relationship with Al Qaeda and other groups. Therefore, they still have some influence on the ground. And therefore, their presence is also important. Now, Iran is very doubtful about Saudi and Qatar presence around the table, because they say the only thing they're going to do is to sabotage the peace process, because the people on the ground are in retrieve. They're no longer advancing or making gains or can change the course of event on the ground in Syria, because Russia is determined to find a solution by military means or by peaceful means to the Syrian war. But they have to be there, and they're going to be there sooner or later.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard this story before where arm, terrorist groups for your own purposes, and then they turn on you. Hasn't this happened before?
Afghanistan.
Well, yes, we saw that in Afghanistan, right. We saw that in many places where Al Qaeda was operating in Iraq, and everybody helped Al Qaeda in Iraq at the time of Zarqawi, because the target was the presence of the Americans. The Syrians were afraid of the Americans, the Iranians were afraid of the Americans, and the Americans said our targets are Syria, Iran, Lebanon, Sudan, etc. Therefore, the plan was to invade different countries and to create a new Middle East. For this aim, everybody supported Al Qaeda in Iraq, and Al Qaeda turned against everybody, even against Al Qaeda Central itself. The differences between Ayman al-Zawahiri and Zarqawi are available online. We can see the correspondence between them. We can see the differences of tactique between both leaders. So Al Qaeda turned against everybody and followed, in Iraq, I'm saying, and followed its own path to transform itself into ISIS. And again, ISIS was supported by everybody when it was still in Iraq. I remember in 2014, in June, the Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, all countries of the region called ISIS the Sunni revolutionary. They didn't call it ISIS or Al Qaeda. They said these are Sunni tribes. They are turning against the Iraqi government in Baghdad, and particularly in Maliki. But then when ISIS started to launch a threat against everybody, then it became the enemy of everything, of all countries.
My question is, it looks like, based on what you're describing, and as you noted, a lot of these groups that are being supported by the Gulf states are in retreat. Is it possible that if there's no lasting peace deal, that the rebel forces are simply defeated? They're just crushed to the point where they don't matter, and the government takes back all the country, or at least most of the country outside of Kurdish or other control. Is it possible that the rebels are actually just finally defeated, or is that not in the cards either?
To defeat the rebels, this requires many years of fighting, and it is not a logical solution, because we're talking about tens of thousands of fighters. Even with all the airstrike that is available in the power of Russia, it is not possible to defeat tens of thousands of fighters everywhere on the Syrian land. And also, when the Syrian army and its allies need to take a particular land, they need to leave some forces to keep some kind of order, to protect what is the demarcation line with the other rebels. All that necessitate power that is not available to cover the whole Syrian territory. Therefore, this is not a project. The real project to end the war in Syria is to negotiate and to listen to these people. There are people in Syria who are with Assad. There are people in Syria who are against Assad. And there are people in Syria who are against Assad and the rebels. And they just want the end of this ongoing war since the last 5.5 years. Therefore, the people who are against the actual Syrian government have a voice, and there are militants who are not jihadis who are fighting for their cause because they want to change. Now, the change is not going to happen as they want, and the government is not going to have it in its way also. There has to be a compromise in between both sides, and there must be a common ground where there are no losers.
Do you think that that's what Russia wants to achieve, mainly?
Yes, I think this is Russia. This is what Russia wants to achieve, and this is why Russia brought in Turkey as a partner, not only to detach Turkey from the United States or to exclude the Obama administration, but also because Turkey has requests in Syria. If Turkey is in control of the northern part of Syria, it is now in Jarablus, and it is taking slowly but surely is going to control Elbab. Therefore, it is one of the players. And as one of the players, along with tens of thousands of militant jihadis who are kind of detached from Al Qaeda, it is also considered one of the parties who are essential in this war. Therefore, they have also demand to be met. And Russia is going to try to find a balance between all these and to reach an agreement where everybody can feel comfortable with it. Nobody is going to have it in its way. And therefore, Russia is imposing ceasefire today, as Russia imposed the ceasefire 6 months ago, and forced it upon its own allies who are not very keen to stop this war until the defeat of all jihadists.
Two questions that I hear a lot. I think they're going to be a very simple question to you, but Americans are baffled about it. One is, why do the Saudis and the Gulf states want to take down Assad? Why does Assad have to go?
There are many reasons to force Assad to leave. First of all, Assad is part of the axis of the resistance that form Iran, Hezbollah, and himself, and they have created a solidarity to support each other against Israel. That was manifested in 2006, the Israeli-Hezbollah war, where Assad opened all his warehouses to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah was able to get hold of strategic weapons to use against the Israeli advance and prevent Israel from reaching its objectives in the 31 days of war. Second, because Assad refused a gas contract or gas deal that goes from Qatar through Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Turkey to supply Europe and to create a real crisis to the Russian economy that is supplying the gas to Europe, where it's more or less 70% of the gas of Europe comes from Russia. The third is because the Middle East was due to change, because that was the American administration policy to change the regime of Assad, because he was supporting groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. They wanted someone, or they wanted the regime more moderate. Fourth, because Saudi Arabia and Assad did not get along recently, and Saudis also work on a personal basis, not only on a business or strategic basis, where there are no friends or enemy, but there are interests. And they don't work like that. They have a completely different mentality. So removing Assad was a request of, there are many reasons that gathered together to remove Assad from power. And this is where Saudi and Qatar moved in, because they have the money and they can pay for his removal.
Okay. And then there's one other question that it comes up a lot, and it's, if ISIS and Al Qaeda were once together, ISIS broke off from Al Qaeda, when things get really bad for the two of them, will they come back together again?
Well, if we look at the history of Al Qaeda in Syria, the leader or the emir of Al Qaeda in Syria was one of the commanders of ISIS in Iraq, that was called Islamic State in Iraq. It was before it was called ISIS, it was ISI. And it is Baghdadi who sent the emir of Al Qaeda, later on became known as Al Qaeda, but it was a Nusra front. So he was one of his lieutenants, and he sent him with a group of people at the first beginning of the month of the unrest in Syria. And I remember the Julani had an interview on Al Jazeera in July or August 2011. Therefore, he was established before that date, and he was part of ISIS, what we know ISIS today. Therefore, the ideology and the objective of al-Nusra, Al Qaeda, and ISIS is exactly the same. But then for power reason, for who controls what, and Giuliani didn't want to lose his position, so he linked himself to Al Qaeda Central, which is led by Ayman al-Zawahiri. And therefore we started to have Al Qaeda in Syria, or Al Qaeda fi Bilad al-Sham, and ISIS. So these are the two groups. They can meet together? I don't think so, because ISIS is the enemy today of everybody. Al Qaeda still enjoy many chances to survive by hiding under the skirt of the rebels, who are supported by many countries around the world, in the Middle East and on the international arena. Therefore, it is very unlikely for Al Qaeda to join ISIS. The other way around may be possible for many ISIS militants to leave ISIS and to join Al Qaeda, or to leave ISIS and to join rebels groups, or to leave ISIS and go home, return to Europe, to return to other continents, to return to the Middle East, or just stay in Syria and then join small other groups until a solution is found. Therefore, I don't think the migration from Al Qaeda to ISIS is possible, because ISIS is a lost card.
Makes sense. I guess that's good news too.
Well, I have one kind of off-the-wall question. It's just like memory hole stuff. Do you remember when Obama launched this bombing mission, he talked about something called the Khorasan Group? And everybody in the U.S. was scratching their heads, and I know I saw a lot of other people who follow the news and even some experts go, who is the Khorasan Group? And I haven't heard them mentioned, it seems like years now. Did you know who that group was? Is that group still active? Who are they?
The Khorasan Group is basically the group that came from Khorasan, and this is where Ayman al-Zawahiri is believed to be based. And these form the old core of Al Qaeda, who joined the emir of Jabhat al-Nusra, or Al Qaeda, in Syria, following the request of Ayman al-Zawahiri himself, who asked all Al Qaeda to go and join Giuliani to support him and to support Al Qaeda in Syria. So the core group of Al Qaeda, many elements of the core group form what is called the Khorasan Group, and this is what the United States was targeting. Yes, they were targeting genuine targets there, and they were targeting elements that have a long list of activity against the West, against the United States and Europe, and they were involved in different kind of relationship with, at the time of Osama bin Laden, and then Zawahiri, and then in Yemen and in other part of the Middle East. So okay. Yes, they exist.
Oh, okay, cool. So that's good to know now. You said the rebels would probably it's not possible to fully defeat them because there's so many of them, and because it would take so many resources to both hold the ground Assad's taken back and then expand further. Is there a possibility to fully defeat ISIS, and what would happen in that case? I know they're stuck in Mosul. They retook, which may have been a symbolic, I'm sure you can clarify if that was a symbolic thing, to retake Palmyra. Is ISIS, can they be fully defeated, even if the other rebel groups can't?
I think ISIS is the easiest to defeat if there is a will to defeat ISIS. You see, ISIS is very cornered now between Syria and Iraq and caught without resources. The war declaration between Turkey and ISIS is a turn in the history of ISIS. ISIS closed the door on all its supply of logistics, weapon, men, everything that was available from Turkey. And because of the battle between Turkey and ISIS in Al-Bab today in the north of Syria, then ISIS and Turkey are declared enemy. And we can see that ISIS carried out different suicide attacks inside Turkey, and it's not going to stop. It's going to continue because this is part of its tactical fear creating into a country just to destabilize the government of Ankara. Therefore, ISIS is now caught in Syria with only exit available through the desert of Iraq in the Anbar area. And the Anbar is a very wide area. Therefore, ISIS advance toward Palmyra is very logical because ISIS needs to create a way out. It is very well known by watching ISIS closely. In every battle that ISIS is condemned and is losing it, they withdraw the main forces to somewhere else where they can find shelter and reorganize themselves. The day they found the Battle of Mosul is becoming hotter and is creating really no issue for them, they've been trying for the last 2 days to create a way out, to pull out many fighters as possible toward the Anbar area in Iraq, to go down on Ana, Rawa, Al-Qaim to the Syrian borders, and then to go from there to Raqqa. And they would do the same in Al-Bab the day they find the Battle of Al-Bab is lost. Therefore, we can see ISIS presence is going to be limited between the desert of Syria and the desert of Iraq, and no way out. It's extremely easy to defeat ISIS, but not to eliminate it, as in every terrorist group. You can't eliminate terrorism. You can contain it. You can cut the air on it by stopping the finance, by stopping the supply, by stopping the arrival of more men and more recruits, by an intelligent campaign against homegrown terrorism, so they don't have resources, by awareness of the media to stop showing ISIS like an invincible force, because it is not. So if we stop all that, and if ISIS become the enemy, and that is linked to how the world is going to deal with Al Qaeda. If the world is going to define Al Qaeda in Syria as Al Qaeda and as the enemy, then it's very easy to defeat ISIS and Al Qaeda. But as long as Al Qaeda is receiving support, ISIS is not the priority and is going to enjoy to be among us for a very long time.
I think we've probably taken enough of your time, Elijah. Anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I think the ceasefire is going to hold in some areas, like we saw a similar thing happening several months ago in the south of Syria. The area is relatively calm, apart from few attacks here and there, but the ceasefire established before this one was good enough to create an example that this can be transmitted to the north of Syria. Now, unfortunately, we're going to observe an infighting between rebels and Al Qaeda and jihadists, because that is inevitable. It's going to happen if Turkey is seriously engaged in the peace process. If Turkey is engaged in this peace process and wants to end this war and bring everybody around the table, is going to have to split the jihadists from those who are considered rebels or moderate rebels or acceptable rebels. If this happens, it means more war is going to happen between groups, and they have to come out to create a war with the Syrian army just to gather support behind them and to divert the attention on Al Qaeda and jihadists, because it is not in their benefit to stop this war. Otherwise, they will be isolated and defeated. But I think Syria is on the right track. And I think the end of 2017 will show that a serious possibility to end the war in Syria.
That would be wonderful. And I think that's a more optimistic view than I have seen from you heard from you in a long time. So are you more optimistic now than you have been in a number of years?
I'm much more optimistic because I can see that Russia is decisive to end the war, no matter what it's going to cost, by using all possible means. Now the language is for peace. If this is not going to work, then Russia is not ready to fail, because Russia wants place around the international table in every single issue in the Middle East, and it is reaffirming itself as a superpower. Therefore, Russia cannot afford to lose this war. It is a Russian war. It is no longer a Syrian war. And for that, I think, yes, I am optimistic, because Russia is ready to invest everything to stop this war. Now, there's a lot to be done if Donald Trump implement what he said before, that he's not going to go for a third world war, that he's not going to support Al Qaeda, that he's going to eliminate terrorists in Syria, that is ISIS and Al Qaeda. If that happened, then I think 2017 will put an end to the war in Syria.
So shall we wrap up then, Dan and Elijah?
Wrap it up.
Thanks so much. I really can't even express how happy we are that you were so generously shared your time with us and your unique perspective on things. And I hope we can convince you to come back again sometime.
Well, thank you for having me again. It was a pleasure.
Take care.
Okay, take care. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, that's our show. Thank you for listening, and a special thank you to Elijah Magnier. Follow him on Twitter at EJMALRAI. See his work at Alrai Media, alraimedia.com, ALRAIMEDIA.com. See his English versions of his stories at his WordPress site, ElijahJM.wordpress.com, ElijahJM.wordpress.com. If you like the show, please support us at Patreon. You can see us at patreon.com/Around the Empire. $5 a month. Help us make and improve the show. Really appreciate it. And to see more of my and Joanne's work, check us out at shadowproof.com. And if you have any questions, complaints, or just want to yell at me, Dan@shadowproof.com is my email. See you next time.